Hello, friend! Welcome to the fire. Alright, now I want everyone to join me in repeating the following. Persuasion is not mind control. Oh, and also, don't be gross. Dear Rogue, no means no. r/RPG horror stories posted by MicMac5454. Trigger warning for attempted sexual assault. So, for starters, I think it's important to mention that I'm a female DM and this was a table of 6 other men. This was about 2 years ago, back when I was a pretty new DM, and only 19, and this was my first proper long campaign. I was so excited and perhaps a touch too naive. This story takes place at the beginning of this campaign. It started as an island-hopping pirate adventure where they ended up hiring a powerful ship captain named M. They needed her to take them to a dark place under the sea, something she was initially resistant to on account of her wife having died due to the dark forces there. But they persuade her and started on their merry way. The first day starts surprisingly well. The party breaks off to RP with other members of the crew, and the rogue, specifically Arcane Trickster, is following M asking about her past. Good stuff, I so innocently thought. I'm so happy my players are interested in expanding her character. Wrong. By nightfall, I get the infamous unprompted, "I roll to seduce her." And unfortunately, the rogue rolled really well, like a 19 or dirty 20. Well, I tell him that she's really charmed by him, and that in the future, if he ever needs to persuade her, it will be easier because she enjoys your company. However, sex and romance is not an available path for you to follow on her friendship tree on account of the fact that she only lost her wife a few years ago. And more importantly, she's a lesbian and is wholly uninterested in men. Oh boy, do I get a earful of,
You don't get to decide what the dice do.
wait, then what the hell am I doing here? And,
You can't ignore my rolls just to keep the campaign PC.
yikes. So night falls, and pretty much everyone is asleep, save for the first mate and quartermaster who are taking watch at the bow and stern of the ship. Rogue creeps out of his cabin and successfully sneaks past them both and into M's chambers, where he promptly casts Disguise Self to look like her dead wife, and can because M keeps a portrait of her in her chambers, and he slips into bed with her. Well, M wakes up and starts freaking out. She jumps out of bed and brandishing her dagger at him, demanding to know what he is and what he wants from her. My logic here is that M is a savvy seafaring lass who has spent decades on these cursed waters and is more likely to assume this is an evil specter or cursed creature trying to trick her, rather than believe that this is actually the woman she saw die, magically revived. Q whining about how I'm
Metagaming.
and how,
I'll do anything to protect my precious DMPC.
and after I explain my logic behind her reaction, he just rolls his eyes and mumbles about poor logic. Now he's going to roll persuasion to quiet her down and convince her to come back to bed. And it's his first bad roll of the night. Now, this bad roll was of course my fault, because I recently nerfed him. This nerfing comes from the fact that we all agreed to point by our stats. He rolled them without telling me until 3 sessions in, when I realized he had 3 18s: intelligence, dexterity, and wisdom. So yes, I had nerfed him by making him do his stats the way everyone else agreed. This was unacceptable to him because apparently they rolled their stats on Critical Role and Dimension 20, so I'm in the wrong here. Anyways, after Rogue berates me for his bad roll, M is unconvinced by his performance and tells him to show her the wife's true form. Wife was going to be revealed as a Silky, so proving her identity would be as easy as removing her skin and turning into a seal. More whining about this true form thing is coming out of nowhere, and I'm just pulling it out of my ass to block his path, and this will eventually come to nothing, etc., etc., etc. Now, he's scrolling through his spell list looking for something to help, and my young self is just panicking. When you start researching how to be a good DM, most of what you read is about how important it is to not railroad, and to let your players be creative, to yes and that this is a collaborative process, and you shouldn't force anything. So with all that running through my head, and things spinning wildly out of control, and 5 other men just gaping at me and doing nothing to help, I just kinda froze up. I was freaking out until he starts talking about charm person and how he should have charmed her first. But it might not be too late, and I finally got my shit together. The quartermaster, a very buff orcish woman, finally heard the commotion and came in and pummeled the hell out of him while he whined and bitched at me for, you guessed it, metagaming, and whining to the rest of the guys for not standing up for him. Next day, they get booted off the ship onto a deserted, haunted island and had a much harder time getting to where they needed to go. I wish I could say I kicked them out of the party after that, but I was so afraid of making waves back then, and that Rogue proved himself to be racist, sexist, homophobic, and every other bigoted take he could have, and eventually left because my SJW campaign was too PC for him. Since then, I've started 2 major rules in my campaigns. 1. I always try to have another girl at the table. It just makes me feel so much more comfortable knowing that she'll almost always have my back, and it really stems a lot of that boys being boys behavior, and I have someone who gets it on hand. 2. And this is advice especially for my fellow girl DMs. Please, never feel pressured to do sexual or romantic encounters. I know they can be really fun with characters you like and players who respect you, but never hesitate to cut an interaction short if they're forcing roles and sex on you. You are not responsible for being the voice piece for your players to get a fantasy nut off through you. Just because they roll well does not mean you are obligated to flirt back or take them to bed. Having your NPCs be non-romantic is completely okay. Seriously? Come on! How hard is it to be or even act like a decent human being for a few hours in a social setting? I don't know how many times this has to be said, but persuasion is not mind control. Not even charm person is mind control. At best, you're just going to get the most favorable reaction from the other party. You're not going to get narrative control as a player. The closest thing you're going to get to mind control is probably the dominate person spell. And if you use that in the same context as the rogue here, well, then you're a total scumbag. Look, as soon as the rogue made that attempt to sneak into OP's NPC's bed, that's where I would have pulled the plug and let Rogue know that his intentions were unacceptable and most likely kicked him from the game. But that's me, a fully grown adult male. Honestly, it must have been horrible for OP as a 19-year-old woman in a room full of men dealing with this, especially since none of the other guys even said or done anything was pretty messed up in itself. Come on, don't just be a bystander, be a part of the solution. OP, I'm really sorry that you had to go through all that. My last bit of advice is to everyone. Yes and is a great thing to do in TTRPGs, but not always. There are times that you need to stand your ground and say no, especially when something like this happens. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you want to see more content like this. And would you kindly follow the socials posted in the description below. As always, be good, be great, be awesome.